Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
And it is Sunday. We usually stream on Saturday, but we had to move it one day. And instant regret because it is exceedingly hot down here in South Texas.
And muggy. So, oh well.
With a chance of rain later, in order to kick us a little further in the teeth.
Yeah.
Which actually is cool considering what today's topic is.
So, today we're going to talk about weather systems, both the static and the dynamic.
Right. Weather systems specifically for your game, although it's always nice to know how weather works outside because, oh my God. But let's go ahead and just define what a weather system is in general, and then we'll talk kind of about the difference between a game and reality, etc.
Weather systems are generally local weather conditions that are experienced upon a world surface, often in relation to a larger global system of air masses, fronts, and climate factors.
So that has to be what it is because it was on our paper right here. In reality, we got that off of the government, the U.S. government site on what they define weather systems as.
Right.
The reality is weather isn't just rain, wind, and snow. It can be drought, sandstorms, sheet lightning, basically anything that's affected by a combination of the climate, the air systems that go through planet Earth, particular time of year, how close we are to the tilt of the sun, day, night, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot that goes into a weather system in the real world.
Right, but in game worlds,
right,
you have so much more leeway.
Right.
Weather can be a lot more than just that meteorological systems you were describing.
Right, it could be something supernatural, like a weather system could be based off of like some, apocalyptic energy resurrecting the dead.
Right.
It could be something magical, like a magic storm or the sun eclipse in Skyrim if you side with the vampires.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it could be something completely otherworldly.
Otherworldly, right.
So in other words, in a video game, a weather system is some contained area to this part of the game map, whether it be, your overworld map, like in an open world game, or a particular map, like it's rainy when you go to this part of your game, or it's snowy, or indoors you can hear thunder or the howl of the supernatural winds, or, you go into an area and the glade is filled with magical motes of light and the particle effects are everywhere and the sun above you, the sky has a tempest of energy. All of those little quote unquote weather systems are contained to a part of the game that are affected by it, whether it be the whole overall map or a small piece. A real good example of how constrictive you can be is the opening segment of A Link to the Past back for the Super Nintendo, where Link leaves his room, leaves his house, and it's raining. And just for the series of maps that you're in, it's raining. Another good example is one of the maps in Phasmophobia used to just be rain all the time.
Yeah.
Now when you go out into a map, it's one weather system or the other. So you get a lot of leeway when you're designing a game to have your weather systems be as self-contained as you, the developer, want them to be.
Yeah, and as we pointed out, it doesn't have to be natural either.
Right.
Like in Fallout 4, you have the rad storms.
Right, exactly. Rad storms don't exist in real life.
No, they don't.
There's no such thing. You can't have radiation so bad that lightning causes radiation poisoning. You can have a nuclear winter.
Sure.
But that's not the same as a rad storm. So you the developer get an incredible amount of freedom in deciding what your weather system's actually going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's kind of shift over to what Teal mentioned earlier. She said static
versus dynamic.
Right, because there are two different types.
Oh yeah.
And we're going to go over both, and we're going to talk a bit about the pros and cons and why you could choose one over the other. Do you want to go ahead and start with static, hon?
Sure. Static weather. Most of us have played through games that have static weather, and that is it's the same weather on your map. It's just the same. The only time it ever changes is if there's like certain special narrative moments or something you do in the gameplay changes the weather.
Right.
But that's it. The weather just stays whatever it is.
Right. If it's a static weather system, it's raining until you, the developer, say it's not raining now, whether it be because something the player does or otherwise, it just stays that way.
I have an example of that.
Okay.
Yeah. In Dragon Age, I believe it's Inquisition, there's a certain area you go to, and it's raining all the time. Then when you do a certain thing in the game, the weather clears up and it's sunny.
There you go.
And then that from the rest of the game, for the rest of the game, it's just sunny there.
Yeah, there you go. That is actually a very good example of a static weather system.
Yep.
There are a lot of pros to static.
Oh yeah.
Going static. It is a lot easier for you, the developer, to control what is showing and when it is showing.
Yeah.
You can really easy set that atmosphere that way. Here's a good example is maybe you can use it to really highlight something. Like you could really use like a lightning storm to highlight the evil dark castle of the bad guy. So with a static weather, you as a developer get a heavy amount of choice. It's not all roses and rain though, is it?
No, it can be very boring. You always go to that area and it's always raining, or it's always sunny, or it's always daytime.
Yeah. If the player is revisiting that map on a regular basis, they may say, okay, it's always raining when I go to this map. There's always puddles everywhere. I'm always splashing through the same set of puddles on the same road, etc., etc. And it can be a little unnecessary, can't it?
Yeah. It doesn't lend itself to any kind of variety.
Yeah, it really doesn't. You can find yourself setting the same path over and over again, and you're constricting yourself as a developer with assets.
Yeah.
It's just, in other words, it's dependable, but if it's overused or not used properly, it can take away from the life you can give your game. That kind of dynamic life that we want to have. And speaking of dynamic, let's talk about dynamic weather.
So dynamic weather it changes over time. It can go from rainy to sunny to foggy. In Skyrim, it'll snow. You'll have a snowstorm, and then it'll clear up, and it'll be pretty.
Another good example is Edge of Eternity, that game we were playing earlier in the year.
That's true.
That has a very dynamic weather system, both where you're physically located, as well as where you're what's happening currently. Like when you're up in the snowdrift area, you can have clear skies or a snowstorm, or if you're down in the plains, you can have clear fog, rain. Skyrim is pretty much the same way. In fact, most dynamic weather systems try to emulate the ecology of the climate of that area.
They do.
The ecology. So, like if you're playing those games and you're up in a high climate, you're not really going to see rain so much as sleet and snow and potentially blizzards. If you're way up north, same thing. If you're down south or you're in more temperate zones, you're going to see more rain. If you're down in the tropical areas or places that might be a plain, you're going to see heavier storms, heavier lightning, possibly even tornadoes. I'd love to see tornadoes as a dynamic weather aspect.
Actually, I don't see that very often in games at all.
Yeah.
It's a random tornado.
But it does have some cons. It really does.
Yeah. You can't control it, so it can ruin some really good cinematic moments.
Yeah.
Let's say, and this happened to you, Steele, where you come upon a new area for the first time, and so the camera pans back, and you get this panoramic view of the area.
To get this beautiful vista.
And unfortunately, it was the middle of a big old thunderstorm, and Steele couldn't see anything.
It was the very first time when I played the early access version of Edge of Eternity, and I went to Heliodor, and I think it was Heliodor, the name of the capital. I went to the capital city, and it was a gorgeous vista because that game is very pretty.
Yes.
And there was a heavy thunderstorm with heavy fog and heavy lightning, and the camera was panning around the city that was supposed to be the capital, and I didn't see a damn thing. I saw an outline of some buildings here and outlines of building there, and chat and I were like, "Defark, what was supposed to go on?"
Yeah.
So unfortunately, in this moment, the very same dynamic weather system that gave this game beautiful, beautiful weather absolutely ruined that moment, which could have been just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It really could.
Another thing is you could have unintended gameplay issues.
Yeah, unintended gameplay issues. Like, let's say that your rain system causes mud. And you've already coded in that if it's raining, the ground gets muddy and it slows your horse down. Well, what if there's a muddy road that now is going to be it's going to slow your horse down, but you've scripted in a horse chase scene where it needs to be very much on the player's skill. Yeah. But by adding this mud, you've made it very difficult, if not impossible, for them to succeed in the chase scene.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, do you say get good, even if it's something the player, regardless of their skill, can't complete? I don't think so. I think at that point, you have to take responsibility and said, by the very nature, you want them to get through this sequence. They can't because of the gameplay mechanics. You've set them up for failure. And it probably was not intended. I don't know too many developers that do that just because they're jerks. But the dynamic weather system screwed them over.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So
you have to take all that into account.
Yeah.
You have to decide what's best.
Yeah. As the developer, you have to really consider when to use static and when to use dynamic. And that's the thing. You're never beholden to use just one thing. When we talk to new developers and the hobbyists who are happy to use these systems because they look cool, they talk about, I'm going to have this dynamic weather system and it's going to be fantastic. And we want to ask them, one, why are you using dynamic weather? Does it fit your game? Two, do you always need the weather to be dynamic?
Yeah.
Aren't there times when you can just turn that dynamic weather off and just have it be static weather? Maybe, and Edge of Eternity did this, and I was super fucking happy. In their full release, in their gold release, when you go and trigger that cinematic vista of the capital, if it's raining, if it's blizzarding, it doesn't matter. It clears up the weather enough to give you that vista.
There you go.
And it was raining when we went to the capital the second time, and the rain stopped, and you could still tell it was overcast. It wasn't a bright day, but they didn't have the rain and the intense fog. Yeah. So even though it was an overcast view, I got to see this beautiful city from far away. And
there it is.
And that's what you as a developer can do. You can turn off, you should be able to.
You should be able to
turn off your weather long enough to show a point, to showcase what you're trying to showcase. And then you can turn it back on. You can go the other way around. You could have it be an overcast day where it looks like it's going to rain and it's all dynamic right now. Or it's a night that has, a very clear sky. And then as they approach the castle of evil darkness, maybe you can start having them clouds start rolling in as they get closer and closer. Do a check. See if the weather is currently storming. If it's not, start pushing it in that direction and then show the cutscene of the dark evil castle with lightning and rain, and then they're in a lightning and rain system. They're going to say, that was so cool. I approached the castle. There's a thunderstorm. Lightning's framing the back of the evil castle, and now I'm in a rainstorm. I'm cool with that.
That just made me remember that in Elder Scrolls Online, they had a supernatural storm system that was just around the Dark Anchor.
Just around the Dark Anchor, right. As you approach a Dark Anchor, the weather system shifts to Cold Harbor. It starts to snow. The sky gets very dark.
It's very dark. The clouds are swirling.
You hear thunder and cracks of lightning. And same thing in Oblivion. When you approach Oblivion Gate, you start to get the red boiling clouds and the heat thunder and all that because you're getting closer to Mehran Dagon's Oblivion realm.
Yeah.
So in that case, they pushed the weather in regardless of what it was, and then they reset the weather back to whatever it was after you destroy the gate or the Dark Anchor.
Right.
And that's really how it should be.
That's a good use of static in a dynamic system.
Right. And then returning to dynamic when it was appropriate.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things you as the developer need to think on when you're building these systems.
Yeah.
Whether they be static or dynamic or whatnot.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that you want to think about is the impact on gameplay.
Yeah. What is the impact on gameplay? What is it? Let's go over some examples here. Snowstorms and sandstorms, whether it be a desert or a tundra or the middle of a mountain. those are things that can actually reduce visibility.
Ooh, and fog. Fog as well.
Heavy
fog
can do it as well. And because of that, you can use that lack of visibility to make stealth easier for players, and you can also make it harder for them to avoid ambushes.
Yep.
And honestly, you should be following that kind of realism. If you have a foggy or a sandstormy or a snowstormy area, then you probably should take visibility into account for your characters, whether it be the enemy sensing you or you seeing the enemy to avoid ambush. All of those little things.
Yeah.
And you can use that. What's another one we can talk about?
Well, another one, let's talk about, danger situations, hazards.
Okay, hazards. Okay.
Let's say that what I can think of is the knight in full armor, full plate mail, and goes into a lightning storm.
Oh god, so you have Sir Zaps-a-Lot walking through the thunder plains, and he gets hit by lightning.
Oh,
that's a good one. That is a really, really good one. And you can have hazards like a tornado. We mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
Remember that VR game I was playing, Solus?
Yeah.
Where you're like trapped on that alien planet?
Oh, with all the different tornadoes.
Right, tornadoes would drop sometimes, and those things, if they hit you, would kill you.
Yeah.
So it's like, it was a real hazard. And those weren't like tiny tornadoes. When they would approach, they looked like a real sized tornado. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
It was a VR game. So you'd have to go hide in a cave. You'd have to go, into a place with shelter. And it had to be a shelter that was strong because the tornado would tear apart, crappy shelters.
Yeah, it would.
It was a really good way of using it. It was very dynamic because those things would drop randomly. In fact, the closer you got to the end of the game, you were getting to an area that was more and more more dangerous.
Yeah.
More tornadoes would drop. I mean, it wasn't like they were dropping every 5 seconds. The developers did it very judiciously, but they used this weather system as a way that could instantly kill you.
Yeah.
And they could fall at any time. They were not scripted. And they had very random paths, like tornadoes had. And the trunks of them, tornadoes have the trunks, moved around very randomly, like a real weather system.
Yeah.
And you as the player, you had to adapt, or you were going to die. So there's that to consider.
There's that, and let's just go back to a previous example that you used of trying to move quickly and on a muddy road.
Oh yeah.
Movement speed.
Movement speed in general, right. Like hitting the muddy road on your horse,
Yeah.
Or even better yet, if you want to talk about horse issues, a mire.
Yes.
Like trying to go through a mire. I'm thinking of the Never-Ending Story movie, where Treyu's going through the marsh to go talk to the large turtle, and I mean that ends up being what kills his horse is basically quicksand, quick mud, and that's it, or the lightning sand in the fire swamp.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, those things like that, and those are in movies and not games, but you could easily do that. You could easily have it be that if it's a certain type of terrain under a certain weather condition, it's going to slow movement speed. And then, once you have that logic programmed in, then you start looking at how you can change the way the models work.
Yeah.
To react appropriately. I mean, it's layers and things you do piece at a time, but you're telling the game, if on this type of terrain, with this type of weather, change the movement speed.
There was that game that I played a while back. I played it on stream, and whenever a snowstorm would blow in, your character moved more slowly. I was moving slowly.
Yeah, was that Dragon Quest XI where they were covering their face? Or was that Trials of Mana?
That must have been Trials of Mana, I think, because it was a snowstorm would blow up, and I was walking more slowly because I'm going against the wind.
I do recall your character also put their forearm in front of their face so they could see a little better. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That was cool, but it was also a problem because there were still enemies out there in the map, and I couldn't run from them.
No, you couldn't. Another real good one here, for movement speed issues is you can go the other way. Maybe your movement speed creates sort of ice on the road, and it speeds you up, and you actually start sliding, and it's hard to control your character.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the ice sheet puzzles where you skate across the ice and you have to hit rock. Oh, those are awesome.
Those are fun.
I mean, literally, you have places that frost over.
Yeah.
And when they frost over, it's harder for you or your horse or your carriage or whatever, your motorcycle. You know, not to just be fantasy.
Yeah, and you just slide.
For a car-based game, you know, whether it be a racing game or a game like GTA or wherever where you use automobiles, you can really use the weather system in multiple ways, including movement, visibility, etc. Could you imagine playing a game like GTA that used dynamic weather like thick fog, like thunderstorms with tornadoes?
Ooh.
You know, a game where, you know, you're driving along a coastline to go from one mission to the next. It's all open world, and a real bad storm hits and you have to deal with storm surge.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that you can use these weather systems for to really bring life and to make your player have to adapt. I'm not saying all players are going to want to adapt every few seconds. A lot, you know, some players just want to say, hey, let me go and know it's raining over here. Let me know it's, you know, clear over there. But, you know, there are players who want that adaptable challenge.
Right.
And that is actually a good thing. Developers, you should be trying to create situations where the player has to adapt to the challenge within reason.
Exactly. And let's not forget our supernatural elements either.
Oh, my goodness. Right.
Yeah. So, like otherworldly stuff. Oh, I got an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Fallout 4, you have the Bar Harbor DLC.
Oh, yes.
And it's always foggy there. And the fog is poisonous. It's irradiated.
Yeah.
So, you're constantly taking radiation damage when you're walking around. And not only that, but much higher level monsters exist in that mist. It bumps them up. Bumps their stats up. Yeah. So that's some serious gameplay impacts.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, you know, it's just in general. But it's beyond just gameplay. Gameplay's important, but there's also, you're going to have impacts on things like narrative. That's important too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Narrative impacts like, there's an important moment.
Yeah. Exactly.
And go back to the example of you missed looking at that entire city because it was raining. So, yeah, you missed a very important moment.
So, in order to not miss that moment, you'd have a failsafe like we talked about.
Yes.
So, you want to make sure you do that. Your job as a developer with Views and Vista, as we've talked about before, is to draw attention to places that they can go and then deny them, so they have to work to get there, to give them an idea of what the world's going to be like later on. All that stuff we've gone over before in Views and Vistas.
Yeah.
And you can use the weather to not only enhance that, but to make sure they don't miss it.
Yeah, please don't let them miss it.
Turn off your thunder and your fog long enough to show them your gorgeous mountain vista.
Yeah.
And when I say turn on and turn off, I don't mean like instantly. Give your engine a chance to kind of change things a bit. You know, the smooth transition, have the rain lessen up.
Yeah, we kind of want a smooth transition. It's not, you know, rain and then boom, sunny.
Yeah, stark transitions do not do good. Woo! They look pretty funky. They look pretty funky.
You know, but okay, you mentioned thunder.
Right.
You mentioned, okay, there is nothing more annoying than you're trying to hear something, a very important conversation, and you can only catch part of it because boom, thunder.
So I have had that happen in Fallout 4. Specifically,
really?
Specifically in VR where the sound's hyper immersive.
Yeah.
I was trying to talk to, I think it was either Piper or Hancock, one of my followers, to get information, and I could barely hear them over the thunder of the storm that was happening. I had to actually stop the conversation, bring them to an inside cell, and restart the conversation because I couldn't hear them, and it was difficult. So one of the things that could be done, and this is by both Bethesda and modders in general, is you can bring the volume down just enough so that you can hear the conversation that is happening.
Yeah.
You know, and that's okay. You know, if you mute a sound around you in order to hear a conversation, majority of people aren't going to go, why did the sound go down? You know, they're going to be grateful that they could hear the conversation, especially if it's something you initiated.
Exactly.
You know, you're forcing this on them. You know, so you're walking with your partner, you're moving around, it's storming. If your partner's going to suddenly initiate a cutscene and they can't hear you, your player's going to get annoyed. Don't do that. You know, find a way, bring this ambient sound down.
Yeah, bring it down. The conversation occurs, and then you can bring it back up.
Yeah.
You know, that's fine. In fact, that is very seamless.
Yeah, don't make them miss important information just because, dynamic weather is realistic.
Right.
You know, reality games don't have to be reality.
Yes.
Games don't have to be 100% real.
No, they don't. And speaking of reality, Sandstorms, you're trying to get to a location and you're supposed to look for the giant balancing rock.
Yes. Yeah, like a marker.
Yes, a marker.
Yeah.
And then boom, sandstorm. Well, I can't see anything.
And you miss the marker completely.
Yeah, you wander around and
right.
I've done that before.
Again, remember, guys, it's not the same as making the game challenging. There's a difference between making the game challenging and setting the player up for failure.
Yeah.
If your sandstorm only reduces visibility enough to where they can still see the marker in the distance, but they're just not looking, then that's their fault. If the sandstorm makes it impossible to see the marker when they have to find the marker, then that's more on you. So remember, guys, it's okay to make a game challenging. Players like challenges.
Of course.
But don't make it so that they can't win, and then that frustrates them, because what do we say frustrated players do?
They just put down the controller and go off and do something else.
Yeah.
They're not playing your game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, you got to think about all those impacts. You got to think about your gameplay impacts, negative and positive. Definitely the negative impacts for narrative. There's so many you should consider.
Yeah.
Any other type of impacts?
Okay. This is specifically for our coding type developers.
Coding, you mean people like who deal with engines and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
The application impacts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. I see where you're going with this. So you're talking about impacts on the actual game engine and performance.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Performance. Yes, yeah.
I was thinking about the rendering.
Oh gosh, rendering.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got all this weather going on in a certain location. What is that doing?
Right. Is it going to affect the engine? Yeah.
What
I
is
can
that
see
doing
that.
to your frame rate?
Right. To the frame rate, because if frame rate tanks, players not going to be able to play it. They're not going to be able to stream it. It's going to look janky. It's going to feel janky. It's going to be very, very uncomfortable. I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah, I myself personally cannot stand it when I'm playing a game and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and I'm having a fantastic time and I know I have the recommended specs and I enter into an area and it's storming or there's some other really awesome weather system and the engine can't handle that and the location.
And just stutter, and everything just starts stop, start. You know how that is.
Exactly. And you guys can fix that, by the way. You don't have to be beholden to, oh, well, there's nothing I can do. You never want to say that.
Absolutely, there's stuff you can do.
Also, don't want to have to say, well, I guess I just won't have rain in this place. You can lessen what the rain does.
Yeah.
You can lessen the view of how far the rain goes. What you can do is you can have it be that it's raining really heavily right where the player's avatar is.
Yeah.
And then as you spread out, those particle effects attenuate just enough so that it looks like it's raining. You can have the rain be replaced, have the rain be, lighter and have a lot more lightning. Create your atmosphere in other ways. Don't think that just because you want a rainstorm, it's got to be shooting buckets from all over the cell. In fact, why not create a rain system that follows the player and then attenuates out? Would the player ever realize that the rain isn't going all the way across the plains, especially if you have wind and wetness shaders? So you have wind moving the trees, you have wetness shaders that hits the whole area if it's raining, so it looks like it's raining, but the rain's following the players. There's techniques you can use to make it easier on the renderer and not break your frame rate and ruin your player's experience.
Yeah.
There's just so many variables.
Yes, and you're going to have to account for all of them.
Yeah. You as the developer need to know, what is your current map, your current level? What does it have in it? How would the weather affect it? If you're going to use something like a tornado that can destroy weak shelters, how many destructible objects is that, going back to frame rate?
Yeah.
Or are there destructible objects that are there? If you're going to build your thunder plane, okay, what happens if the lightning hits something? Does it create a small flame and then that flame eventually dies down and just has a scorched decal on the landscape? Or does it actually set a fire that spreads and can cause damage to the player and other things around them? These are variables you, the developer, have to keep track of.
Yes, you do.
Get that spreadsheet Teal and I are always talking about.
Because if you leave something out, trust me, it's going to show up. In a bad way.
In a bad way. You're going to get these bugs and glitches that are going to ruin your experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the dynamic weather system does add a whole new layer to the bugs.
The bug testing, yes, the whole new layer.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to do a lot of bug testing, especially a lot of Halo testing. You
Yep.
know, how does one thing affect everything else around it?
Yeah.
You know, and then as you fix that bug, Halo testing, how does that bug fix create potentially new bugs? You're going to be doing a lot
Yeah.
of bug testing, specifically dealing with the weather. If you choose to have that kind of dynamic weather system,
Yeah.
don't let it scare you, though. If you use a dynamic weather system properly, especially if you can go with a dynamic static hybrid that lets you really accent those narrative moments,
Mm-hmm.
and you really take into account your engine, your variables, etc., 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 you're going to have a hell of a game. Make your game really awesome.
Absolutely, I agree on that.
Yeah.
You will be creating something really fun and unique for the player.
Yeah. All right, so now it's time for us to take questions from our live studio audience.
Yeah, if you've been watching, remember to use the podcast question feature in our chat.
Yeah, it just costs 50 points, which is like 5 minutes of watching us.
Yeah.
You know, since we don't get a chance to monitor our chat during our podcasts, we always look forward to questions from our audience.
Yes.
And so now, dynamic weather systems in general and static weather systems in general do add a life. Do you have a preference as to which ones you like more? Do you like more static, more dynamic, hybrids, et cetera, et cetera?
I actually prefer the hybrids because there are times when it's really important to see or feel a certain thing.
Yeah.
And I don't want the weather to screw that up.
I agree. I actually feel exactly the same way. I used to go all static. I used to be very much into static systems, and I found dynamic systems were overcomplication that I was not a fan of. And it wasn't just as long before I was playing the Edge of Eternity situation with the cat, long before that. I really was not a fan of dynamic weather systems outside of open world games. My only time I accepted them was during games like Oblivion, Skyrim, etc. And then I just started shifting over time as I've watched them be more intelligently applied in both indie and AAA games. And I found that I really like a hybrid. Yeah, I still want sometimes for the weather to be a certain thing at a certain place all the time. Like whenever you approach the dark castle of evilness, I always really, as long as the dark one is there, have it be storming.
Stormy with the dark clouds swirling.
Yeah, like I think it was the dark anchors that really started to push that. I actually was annoyed at the Oblivion Gates because I would be enjoying the weather. And, the best thing about the red roiling skies was, oh, okay, I'm getting near a gate.
Right.
But I just found it to be really annoying because it was overplayed and you had the exact same weather in
the exact same place.
Yeah.
Because the gates were there. They never moved.
Right. And then once you went inside, the interior had the same weather.
Yeah.
It felt like they were overplaying the dark clouds on the red background.
Yes.
But then when we started playing ESO, and I saw the way
different
with the anchors.
With the anchors, they simulated random falling.
Right.
They simulated the random falling.
Right.
And so when they came down, whatever weather was happening there at the time
gets changed
to
the dark anchor weather, and I love that because the weather of ESO was dynamic as you'd expect. Sometimes sunny, sometimes rainy, sometimes very rainy. And I really appreciated that, but when you hit that anchor, it always changed as Cold Harbor's weather took over.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. It was snowing even down in elsewhere.
Sure.
It was just so enjoyable. And the thing is those places were set in stone. The dolmens where the dark anchors were dropped were set in stone. Dark anchors never dropped randomly outside of a few quests.
Exactly.
So it was just this enjoyableness of like, hey, when I hit this area, I know shit's going to go down. And then when we went to Cyrodiil, the Imperial City with the mega anchor was always there.
Yeah.
So you always had this central point in Cyrodiil where you could see the mega anchor trying to pull in the White Gold Tower.
That's right.
It just made the atmosphere really enjoyable. So to me, I like the hybrid as well. Okay, we do have a question.
Oh, we do have a question. This is from KV Kingdom. Open-ended question. You've talked about weather systems as game mechanics and how they have to be adjusted so they don't become obstructions. But what about using them to highlight narrative points? Like using rain to emphasize how it makes the main character feel. or the clouds parting and sun shining for an important reveal.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, yeah.
A real good example would be if your character's struggling because bad things happen to them. Maybe it was like a prince whose kingdom was destroyed, to use something rather tropish, and you're seen with them as you're watching them in that cut scene. They're trudging through the rain and mud or the snow, and then you're controlling them, and it just shows the negative impact of their lives and how bad things are, and then the clouds part, and there's hope. There's actually a game that does that so powerfully. Every time we've seen that scene, it's made us cry.
Yeah.
Dragon Age Inquisition, the destruction of Haven, and the finding of the castle, Sky Castle, whatever it was called, Skyhold.
Yeah, Skyhold.
Because they're in the mountains. Haven just was destroyed by Gryphospit. And, they sing that song of, trying to have some level of hope.
Yeah.
And it's snowing.
It's snowing really badly.
And they're trudging through the valleys, and then suddenly the clouds part and there's Skyhold.
Yeah.
Their hope.
And the sun is shining on it.
So powerful. So yeah, KV, in that instance, you can use the weather to really punch the emotion up.
And I encourage that. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, and you can use it the other way around. Like, let's say you have two rivals, and this rivalry has been building, this nemesis, two enemies, and it's been building the whole game. And, you and your nemesis, you and your character's arch enemy have been going through hell to get to each other. One has always been one ahead of the other, and then the other's been ahead of the other, and it's been back and forth. And the inevitable conclusion between the two is going to clash in the climax of the story. And when the two of them finally meet, whether it be on a field or a mountain, and it starts to rain.
Yeah.
And then the rain starts to turn into thunder as the two pull out their weapons and begin the final clash. That is powerful.
Ooh, it is.
And that's all weather.
Yeah.
That is all weather. So that is a very good question, KV. Let's see if we have any more surface before we do. Really good moments that you can use the narrative for. Doesn't always have to be extreme things.
No, it doesn't.
And sometimes they can be very subtle. This was not in a game, but in an anime. But if you recall, the character of Juri in Revolutionary Girl Utena
That's right,
was a character who held her emotions at bay really hard. She'd never really showed her emotions.
No.
Outside of, anger.
Right.
But she didn't allow herself to smile much or cry. And, she was very chained to this person emotionally. And when she's finally set free by losing her duel to Utena, and she's set free from this chain that's been around her whole life, she looks up at the sky and it starts to rain, and the rain's disguising her tears.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be instant clash, doom, doom, doom. Sometimes it can be something like that. Sometimes it could be something that's just sweet.
Yeah.
Bittersweet. Pick one.
Yeah, different, yeah.
All right, we got another one.
We got another question. This is from Burke. Another thing to note would be using weather to signal the passage of time. Many open world games use a semi-static system where it rains at a certain hour, using weather as a warning of a mechanic, such as in Chrono Trigger, where Nu only showed up in the Dino Forest after rain, which he never saw, honestly.
Right.
Storms in Breath of the Wild, where if you wore metal, you were dead.
That's right. Yeah, Breath of the Wild, if you wore metal in a thunderstorm, you're zapped.
Yeah. Or, as KB said, a narrative system, maybe a supernatural monster announces its presence with warmer weather or causing ice storms.
Yeah, all of that. All of that. And remember, dynamic weather in a video game doesn't have to be like it is in reality, where it's raining for 7 hours, gets clear for 2 hours, and then starts raining again for another 9. You can program an actual weather system, simulated fronts, simulated climate. You can do that.
Yeah.
But you don't have to follow reality example.
No, you don't.
And that semi-static, that static dynamic hybrid works more in your favor.
Yeah, this is your game world.
Yeah.
So you make the rules.
Right. And if you want to have a game that mimics reality, and you want to sit there and whatever your game world is, and you want to program something that actually, instead of having just systems turn on and off randomly, actually takes into account what real weather patterns that you program in, even if they're supernatural, you go right ahead. It's a lot of work. You're going to have to find those ways to keep people from missing key moments, but it will be rewarding.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And a lot of times, do you really want to consider that as opposed to other things? If you're making a hardcore, open world RPG with tons of crafting systems and dynamic quests and radiant AIs and all that. Hush. Do you really want to add in that kind of a weather system that takes that much work and has to be tracked and bug tested?
Yeah.
So a lot of it depends also on how much work you, the developer, want to put into things.
That's true.
Very good. Not really a question from Burke.
No,
more
it's
of a
really good point that Burke made.
Yeah. See if we have any others pop in before we go ahead and call it. But this is definitely one of the more interesting things. And, a lot of the stuff that we go over in DLC Not Included is stuff like how to do level design, how to do lighting, that kind of stuff. The weather's not talked about a lot.
No, it's just kind of always been in the background.
Yeah.
Something that is.
Yeah, something that is just is. But it requires just as much effort as anything else. And we actually, when we were researching this topic, we found a white paper.
Yeah.
And we have it at the bottom of our notes. And I think for the YouTube VOD specifically, I'm going to link that white paper. We don't usually do that for our podcast. We usually do that for our forums.
No, but this is a very good read. And if you're as fascinated by weather as I am, I almost became a meteorologist at one point in my life. You will get a lot from reading this paper. And
it is more of a technical paper on the aspects of weather systems and games. So don't expect like a happy read. It's technical, but it's really informative.
Yes, it is.
So if you're following DLC Not Included on YouTube, just look in the description. You should see it in there.
Yeah.
Pretty good stuff. For those of you who are watching us on audio, check out our YouTube channel anyway. We do teach game development.
I promise you, we do teach.
We actually don't plug our YouTube channel enough on our podcast. We probably should start doing that.
But we do have a YouTube channel, and we have our creative classroom videos.
Yeah, those are on archive, but they're good.
We've got our forum. We've got some of our old critical plays. We've got all kinds of stuff on there where we teach you and make different points.
Right. Occasionally we'll put out a short form video, like I did one on turn-based battle systems, and Teal did one on SWOT analysis.
Yes.
Strength, weakness, opportunity, threat.
That's it.
Wow, I remembered that.
Yeah.
So we do occasionally do stuff like that. A lot of our stuff is just, the forums, which is where we teach specific techniques. Anyway, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we should probably start wrapping this up.
Okay, let's wrap it up.
You guys have been amazing. As always, we want to thank our live audience for watching us and for the questions. Definite shout out to anyone listening to us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, etc. You guys make this the best it can be.
Yeah, you do.
All right, so join us next time for DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.